in Atlanta?
Look, Michael Penix Jr., if he's able to get healthy, come back off this injury, off this partial ACL tear, and be healthy and execute, they're gonna give him the runway. Like, they won a competition. I'm with you there. One of the reasons, if you're Tua, that made this a very attractive destination is because their starting quarterback is injured, and I have an opportunity to potentially get a head start in the offseason and get all the reps with the ones, if you will. And so I think Tua will have a head start, as I mentioned, but Michael Penix Jr., so I do these bodybuilding competitions.
We know.
Yes.
And I always watch when I'm not on stage, there's smaller guys and then there's bigger guys. And a smaller guy is easier to look really good and symmetrical on stage. And it's impressive. But you want to know what's more impressive? The bigger guy. When he looks that's Penix Jr. When he gets on the field and he starts throwing the ball, it's going to look a little different. He has the bigger arm. I know accuracy was an issue last year. Like, he has growing to do, but that's why you got Stefanski. You're paying Stefanski to solve either one of these quarterbacks. And so if he's that guy that we believe he is, or they believe he is, then be the answer to what Michael Penix needs to unlock his talent to get him to perform at the higher level.
So I agree that, like, if I was running the team, I would want it to be Penix because I think he represents a higher ceiling. The bigger guy with a bigger arm, right? Just the pure traits of it. But this is going to be, I think, a good old-fashioned quarterback competition. You have a new GM who didn't draft Michael Penix. Like, we're going to say, well, Michael Penix was a first-round pick of the Falcons. So? Matt Ryan wasn't there. Ian Cunningham wasn't there. Kevin Stefanski wasn't there. They haven't paid him anything. They haven't even decided on a fifth-year option for him. Like, Michael Penix has started 12 of the possible, 30, how I can do the math, 12 of 34 games that he started 12 of them. And in 6 of those 12, he's completed less than 60% of his passes. So he hasn't been that good. Tua, they're paying him nothing. And he can't stay healthy. And he has a weak arm, and he can't see over the offensive line, and he has a serious concussion history. Well, Michael Penix has a serious ACL history. Like, there's a really good chance that neither of these guys
is true.
Is healthy for a full season, or is the long-term answer for Kevin Stefanski and the Falcons. Like, the odds are, and this isn't maybe the sexiest take, but the odds are this is a competition, and we see both of them this year because neither one of them is all that impressive. But I do think the traits of Penix, just pure arm strength and size, the Falcons would see him as representing a higher ceiling than Tua. But, like, both of these guys have huge question marks attached to them.
I agree with you that anyone interested in the Falcons would probably prefer that Penix be the guy and that he just wins the competition and is their starting quarterback going forward. But I think Tua's the better quarterback.
There we go.
Tua has been, Michael, and I get it, he's young, or he's early in his career. It's a small sample size. But in his 2 seasons, Penix is 4-8. With Kirk Cousins, who obviously was a good quarterback, they're 12-10. That's not to mention Penix is below 60% accuracy or completion percentage. Like, Tua has been a winner. I know I joke, but it's true. He hasn't beaten the good teams consistently, hasn't won in cold weather. But Tua's 44-32 for his career. All right, and that predates Mike McDaniel, Tyreek Hill, all of that stuff. I don't know. Yeah. Because I don't know if Penix will ever reach the heights as low as they are to compared to some people. That Penix or that Tua's already reached.
Tua's 44-32. Joe Burrow is 43-33. So this idea that you can't win with Tua, and I know he's not Joe Burrow, but the guy has gotten onto the field and left the game winning. The guy wins.
Not in the greatest situation as far as an organization.
I love Tua, and I root for Michael Penix. I'm all in on the Tua reclamation project.
Tua's accurate. I mean, that's a big.
led
There's
the-
a big
led the
gap
league in completion
the
percentage.
accuracy between these
This
two.
is all true. But when you sign up for Tua, which they have signed up for Tua in some regard, and you say he's our starter, everything needs to be on schedule and on time.
Right.
If it's not, your offense is going to look completely different.
I believe we're collectively missing the forest for the trees in this entire discussion. While I thoroughly enjoy diving deep into the nuanced details of these conversations, there's simply too much happening here to ignore the broader context. Let me break this down systematically, because there are multiple layers that deserve examination. First and foremost, Michael Penix Jr. was never positioned to be the Week 1 starter during his rookie campaign. The entire argument about him only starting a handful of games out of a possible 34 completely ignores the structural reality of his situation. The Atlanta Falcons committed a massive financial investment to Kirk Cousins, essentially the equivalent of a $300 million contract when you factor in his age and the significant concerns surrounding his Achilles recovery. They handed him an enormous amount of guaranteed money, then proceeded to draft Penix, who only saw the field because Cousins completely collapsed. Whether you attribute that collapse to lingering injury effects, diminished physical capacity, or simply poor performance, the reality remains that Cousins went down and Penix was thrown into action for approximately the final 3 games of the season. Framing this as some kind of indictment of Penix's capabilities is nonsense. Let's just stop that line of reasoning entirely, because it doesn't hold up to basic scrutiny. Moving to another aspect of this conversation that needs addressing. The suggestion that there are comparable wins and losses between Joe Burrow and Tua Tagovailoa reveals how fundamentally flawed that particular analytical lens truly is. This is one of those moments where I genuinely wish someone like Nick Wright was present, because he possesses the ability to call out takes directly without causing personal offense. I'm always careful about my phrasing, because I never want to create the impression that I'm labeling these analysts as unintelligent or incompetent. That's not my intention whatsoever. The takes themselves can be problematic without the individuals being foolish. However, in this specific instance, the comparison is simply indefensible. Joe Burrow exists in an entirely different stratosphere as a quarterback compared to Tua Tagovailoa. I've been transparent about my genuine support for Tua. I root for his success authentically. Watching him play has become genuinely uncomfortable due to his concerning health history. Every time he takes a hit, I find myself hoping desperately that he emerges unscathed. Concussions are serious business, and I speak from personal experience, having sustained multiple myself. The fact that Tua continues competing at all deserves genuine respect and acknowledgement. But we've reached a point in discourse where we're attempting to place Tua in conversations alongside elite quarterbacks, and that's simply misguided. Mike McDaniel's offensive scheme creates considerable advantages, and I want to be clear that I don't view Tua as a bad quarterback. My primary concern revolves around what I describe as an inherent fragility in his game. Not necessarily fragility in terms of physical toughness, but rather a structural vulnerability in how offenses must be constructed around him. There's an embedded self-protection mechanism built into the offensive approach when Tua is under center, and that creates meaningful limitations. If Tua didn't carry these constraints, I could envision significantly more upside and potential. But the reality is that he's demonstrated an ability to win games without convincing observers that he can truly elevate when circumstances demand it. Consider the scenarios a quarterback must navigate in January football. Imagine Tua going into Philadelphia during freezing temperatures, facing wind and snow. Imagine road playoff games in Washington, Seattle, or New York against the Giants. These are the environments where championship aspirations are realized or extinguished. I simply cannot comprehend feeling genuinely comfortable and confident with Tua in those situations. Now, I do see potential for Tua to experience success with Kevin Stefanski's offensive approach. That's a legitimate possibility. However, the Falcons team he's joining was fundamentally disorganized last season. Expecting Michael Penix to instantly generate consistent success would be equally unreasonable. That said, Penix demonstrated legitimate high-level moments during his limited action. There were stretches where I found myself thinking, all right, this young man can absolutely function at this level. His performance against Tampa Bay in Week 1 was wildly impressive. His showing against Buffalo stood out. His command against Washington demonstrated genuine promise. When you compare those flashes to what Kirk Cousins was able to accomplish with his experience and track record, the distinction becomes clear. Kirk Cousins represents a seasoned veteran quarterback with thousands of professional reps under his belt. Why is it so difficult for people to appreciate the inherent value of veteran presence? When you insert a rookie or first-year starter and compare their production to an established veteran, the veteran will typically demonstrate more consistent success. That's simply how quarterback development functions in the NFL. Unless you're dealing with a hyper-athletic physical specimen who can compensate for inexperience through raw athleticism, the developmental curve requires patience. Players who rely on timing, anticipation, and defensive recognition, the qualities that separate elite veterans from rookies, need time to cultivate those attributes. The physically gifted quarterbacks who can rely on arm strength, mobility, and improvisation might generate more early wins or highlight moments. We've observed this pattern countless times across the league, from Kyler Murray to Lamar Jackson to countless others across the performance spectrum. None of this should surprise anyone paying attention. The developmental trajectory for quarterbacks follows predictable patterns, and Penix's situation fits comfortably within those parameters. The analogy Greg used about smaller individuals appearing more muscular on camera actually captures something relevant here. When you're more compact, muscle definition appears more pronounced. Shorter limbs create the illusion of greater mass. Someone my height with longer limbs might actually possess significantly more functional strength while appearing less imposing visually. That same principle applies to quarterback evaluation. Surface-level statistics and win-loss records can create misleading impressions while obscuring fundamental differences in capability. When I examine the Falcons' current situation, I find myself thinking about amusement parks, oddly enough. My father taught me something valuable during childhood trips to theme parks. I always wanted to experience the most intense roller coasters first, the fastest speeds, the most loops, the maximum adrenaline. He would counsel patience, suggesting we start with milder attractions first. His reasoning was simple. If you experience the best ride immediately, everything afterward feels disappointingly slow and mundane by comparison. You've robbed yourself of the ability to enjoy the full spectrum of experiences. Some NFL moves function similarly. The Falcons' decisions aren't inherently misguided or poorly conceived. They're not disastrous choices. They simply don't generate the same excitement as franchises making splashy acquisitions or dramatic changes. The rides aren't boring. They're just not the record-breaking coasters that dominate headlines. This represents a fundamentally reasonable approach to roster construction, even if it lacks the adrenaline rush of other teams' off-seasons. If the Falcons eventually find themselves requiring both quarterbacks due to circumstances, they'll have positioned themselves to address needs in subsequent drafts. There's been speculation about quarterback-heavy draft classes, though predicting these things with certainty has proven notoriously difficult. What was supposed to be a deep quarterback class one year suddenly becomes next year's draft, the following season. At this moment, Atlanta possesses a veteran presence in Tua, who represents experience at the position. They also hold the promise of potentially greater upside with Penix. Both options carry elements of uncertainty, but the organization has successfully insulated itself from the absolute worst-case scenario, the situation they've endured previously, where quarterback incompetence rendered the entire offense completely non-functional. We're talking about the kind of dysfunction where productive offensive operation becomes literally impossible, regardless of surrounding talent. Penix has already demonstrated he's not that caliber of quarterback. Even if Penix were to sustain an injury, Tua provides a competent alternative. This is where I'll acknowledge some validity to the argument that you can win with Tua, because competent quarterback play does enable victories. However, when discussing a franchise attempting to inaugurate a new era, finally escape irrelevance, and establish legitimate contention status, the question becomes more nuanced. What move transforms you from a division participant to a legitimate Super Bowl threat? What acquisition elevates you to a team that wins the division because you're genuinely excellent, rather than simply being the least dysfunctional option? There's a meaningful distinction between claiming a division title through default and earning it through demonstrated superiority. As of now, I'm not convinced Tua represents that transformative presence. I would genuinely welcome being proven incorrect on this assessment. Nothing would bring me greater satisfaction than watching Tua exceed every expectation and dominate the NFL landscape. I mean that sincerely. I simply don't anticipate that outcome materializing. Penix, however, possesses the theoretical capacity to develop into that caliber of quarterback. I'm genuinely excited to observe his development under Kevin Stefanski's guidance. Whether he reaches his ceiling or encounters setbacks along the way, the Falcons have maintained Tua as a safety net. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that approach. Sometimes that represents the prudent strategic decision. Sometimes that's simply the move. Depending on how this season unfolds, Atlanta retains flexibility to address the position through future drafts while continuing to move forward. This isn't an indictment of organizational direction. It's recognition of the complex reality facing a franchise navigating transition. When I evaluate situations like this, I consistently apply a 3-year window framework. I understand this perspective can become repetitive, but it remains the most useful timeline for assessing organizational trajectory. When Jim Harbaugh was hired by the Chargers, I viewed it through a 3-year lens. When the Eagles reached the Super Bowl in 2022, then needed to restructure, 3 years provided appropriate context. The Lions, various other franchises, this framework consistently offers clarity. The 3-year window can reset at various moments, creating something like a Venn diagram where overlapping timelines intersect. It's not a perfect system by any stretch, but it provides useful structure for thinking about organizational development. For the Falcons, their 3-year window begins now. This 2026 season initiates the Kevin Stefanski era. I'm not primarily concerned with when Penix was drafted or previous organizational decisions. The relevant timeline starts with this coaching staff, this management structure, this organizational philosophy. What can they accomplish from this point forward? I don't expect instant contention. Some franchises possess the pieces to immediately compete. What the Raiders appear to be constructing is genuinely exciting to witness. The Titans represent a different situation with their accumulated talent and quarterback circumstances. Every organization exists in unique circumstances based on existing personnel, health considerations, and competitive windows. The Falcons have pieces. They have talent on the roster. Their previous problems centered on coaching, and now they find themselves navigating a complicated quarterback situation. This doesn't demand an immediate 8 to 12-year solution at the position. Sometimes the appropriate approach involves working through the present circumstances rather than forcing long-term resolution. This represents a difficult sell to a fan base that feels they've been working through it for the past decade. I understand that frustration completely. However, when new leadership arrives, new coaching staff, new management, they cannot be held accountable for consequences stemming from decisions made before their tenure began. That's simply not how organizational accountability functions. The 2024 and 2025 failures have nothing to do with the current regime. They cannot make decisions based on droughts that preceded their arrival. From their perspective, their Atlanta Falcons universe began the day they assumed responsibility. What happened previously bears no relation to their current evaluation process. This connects to what Danny was touching upon in a different context, the idea that draft capital, previous investments, and historical decisions shouldn't constrain present evaluation. When assessing Michael Penix, the relevant question isn't where he was selected or what resources were invested. The only question that matters is whether he can play. Is he good enough? Can he function at this level? Everything else is extraneous noise. Moving forward sometimes requires patience. I recognize this is a challenging message for fans who feel their team has been patiently going nowhere for years. That frustration is entirely legitimate. Sometimes patience represents the only genuine option available. I'm genuinely curious about your perspectives on this situation. What do you think about the Atlanta Falcons' current direction? Who should be QB1 between Tua and Penix? Do you believe either quarterback can elevate this franchise to legitimate contention status? I remember when Kirk Cousins initially signed, numerous respected analysts identified Atlanta as a top contender based on roster construction and coaching. That assessment proved dramatically incorrect. Can this iteration recapture that momentum? Share your thoughts in the comments. I personally read every response, whether you align with my perspective or disagree completely. Let's generate substantive discussion. Let's engage in spirited exchange. Ultimately, let's ensure we're finding genuine enjoyment in these conversations. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. We're building something meaningful here. A community where authentic connection to the content and to each other creates genuine excitement about participation. I believe we're making meaningful progress toward that goal. Don't forget to provide positive rating for this video, as it significantly enhances visibility and algorithmic reach. Thank you for your time and attention. I'll see you in the next installment.